Justin, I'm ready to be like Jerry Lundergan. Jerry Lundergan is an executive in Lexington, Kentucky. Jerry called many years ago before he went to trial. He was indicted for illegally contributing to his daughter's Senate campaign. He said, I'm going to trial. Odds are I lose. In case I lose, I want to prepare for the inevitable sentencing hearing. Through that mitigation and work, he got 21 months, even though the government asked for 63 months. So when this executive called in and said, I want to be like Jerry Lundergan, I told this executive 5 months ago to be like Jerry before he was convicted of trial. At least we're starting today. I share this because some people in our community think if I'm going to trial, I should wait. There's nothing I can do because I've lost a trial. I don't want to jeopardize my right to an appeal. I would argue if you go to trial, you want to be like Jerry because you're not going to get that acceptance of responsibility credit. It's more important than ever. And you have an opportunity to demonstrate to the court why you're a candidate for leniency, because you're going to have a judge say to you, you can disagree with us, but you need to respect the judicial process. And you have an obligation through your own efforts to demonstrate why you are a candidate for leniency. Tina Peters, I'll discuss in this video, chose not to go down that path. Instead of getting a sentence of what would have been 3 years or 4 years, she's going to be warehoused at great taxpayer expense for 9 years. I think the outcome is tragic. I think she has herself to blame, of course, but the judge wanted to make a point. You embarrassed the court. You said things, in my opinion, things that you said are worse than actually some violent acts I've seen in this courtroom. So it was clear Tina Peters failed to understand stakeholders, which is a great exercise for all of you traversing the system. And I know it's the only reason you're watching this video. It's not for me to tell you that in about 40 minutes I'm going to game one of the Dodgers and I'm nervous, but I think they're going to win in 4. No, you're here because you want to get a better outcome. And to do that, you've immediately got to understand stakeholders like a prosecutor. What does a prosecutor want? They'll tell you they care about victims and justice. Fine. What do they also want? Someday they may want to become a judge. They may want to run for office. Maybe a prosecutor will try to become president of the United States, look good on television, become a defense attorney. So prosecutors are out for an end, justice, and to advance their career, and they will use defendants as a means to then. And if you don't put yourself in their shoes and begin to ask questions that they are asking and build a plausible plan, you are going to get 9 years instead of 3. And I'm going to tell exactly why in this video. By the way, welcome to the White Collar Advice community. My name is Justin Matthew Perperni. I'm so thankful that you are here. If you find value in this content, please consider liking and subscribing. Now, by now we know Tina Peters was convicted at trial after she helped facilitate unauthorized access to county voting equipment that she was supposed to safeguard in search of voter fraud. Okay, goes to trial, loses, has every right to an appeal. The problem with Miss Peters, and something all of you need to pay attention to, is the post-offense conduct, right? So like you get into trouble, no bueno, no good. Then the government is watching everything that you are doing in the post-offense conduct stage. So while someone like Jerry Lundergan's continuing to build and volunteer and donate, employ people, getting on with his life, demonstrating the conviction as a little sliver in his life, someone like Tina Peters, according to the judge, and if you want to hear a scathing sentencing hearing, watch that sentencing hearing. I did. I've been to about 1,500 of them. Wow, this was amongst the worst I've ever heard. And you knew that it was going to go bad when the judge said at the sentencing hearing, you are a charlatan. You cannot help but lie as easily as you breathe. So it was clear it was going to go bad. The question is how bad? And it went bad in large part because of her post-offense conduct. She didn't respect the court's order. She violated this order by going to the courthouse with a camera crew. She had no compunction, the judge said, about violating this order, continuing to put people in harm's way, which is why she got 9 years instead of 3. Now, it didn't help, of course, things that she said at her sentencing hearing, and I'm a huge proponent, by the way. If you're not going to have the right message, I don't want you to say anything at all. I admire when people try to convey the right message to a court, and sometimes when I read it, I'll think, I love that you've tried, but let's go back to the shoes of a prosecutor or probation officer or judge. Can you understand why this is the wrong message? And then I'll tell them and they'll say, this is the wrong message. No kidding. And if you're not going to change it, don't say anything at all. So in this case, her bad messaging started with a probation interview. And of course, a probation officer is going to interview you. They're going to get financials, details of the case. It's an opportunity to share more details about your life, your background, your plans moving forward. If you're in custody, what do you expect to do and hold yourself accountable? Instead, she had a terrible probation interview. She continued to blame, excuse her conduct. And I would argue that she kind of fell into something that Dan Ariely writes about in his really wonderful book called The Honest Truth About Dishonesty. He also has one of the greatest TED Talks I've ever seen called Our Buggy Moral Code. But in this book, he talks about creative rationalizations, that defendants really convince themselves they're the victims, and if they did anything wrong, it was really for the greater good. And it's clear her actions of acting for the greater good, and if she did anything wrong, it was justified, came through to government, the stakeholders. There's another great book I read a long time ago called Mistakes Were Made, but Not by Me. And it really discusses how people unconsciously create this self-image of themselves. If they, in this case, break the law, and their image or how they see themselves are fundamentally different than stakeholders, which is part of the reason her lawyers somehow, some way couldn't stop her. It's part of the reason she continued to go down this really bad road. So suffice to say, she had a horrific probation interview that led to a probation report that recommended a very long prison sentence. And now you're going to hear why she got 9 years instead of 3. At her sentencing hearing, she told the judge, "I'm not a criminal, and I don't deserve to go into a prison where other people have committed heinous crime." She showed the judge pictures of her deceased husband and her son, a Navy SEAL who died in the line of duty. She asked for probation in part to keep visiting her 95-year-old mother in Virginia. So we could write a book about what she just said, what she should not have said, because if we're putting ourselves in the shoes of stakeholders, and I'm kind of approaching this from the perspective of a judge or prosecutor, the way they think, because I empathize with Tina Peter serving 9 years. I empathize with her 95-year-old mother. I empathize with the taxpayers of this county who have to warehouse her at great expense. I empathize with this supposed reputational damage to this community. All of this could have gone differently, and it could have started with Tina Peters leaving better. Even if she was convicted, she could have respected the right to appeal and made decisions like Jerry Lundergan to get only 3 years. Because if you ask for probation, you don't even have to ask for probation if you want probation. You know the way that you get probation? Was that redundant? I said it 3 times. I think so. You get probation if you've earned it, if you've demonstrated why you're a candidate for probation. And if you've done the work and built a record, you don't even have to ask for it. Guess what? You're going to get it or something close to it. Another bad message is asking for probation to be with her 95-year-old mother. And that ties into exactly what federal judges and state judges have said through the 1,500 plus sentencing hearings I've attended, which follows. If you were so concerned about spending time with your 95-year-old mother, you would not have violated the court order. You would not have showed up to this court with a camera crew and continuing to show such disdain and disgust for this system. You have no respect. You're a charlatan. So don't tell me you're concerned about your 95-year-old mother. If you were, you would have made different and better choices. I need you to think about that. There are people that go to prison and they'll tell their case manager, I really want to get home to my family. And the case manager will say, yeah, I get it. If you were so concerned about your family, why'd you break the law? Terrible messaging. Awful messaging. And to say something like, I'm not a criminal when the jury has convicted her, you just leave it out. Instead, had she built the appropriate record, she would have said something akin to, Your Honor, I respect the court's decision. I will let my lawyers deal with the judicial process. My goal through the probation interview, the lengthy narrative that I turned in, and other mitigation work that I have done is to ask you to take the totality of my life into consideration, and I assure you, if sentenced to prison, I will continue to use my time wisely to prove worthy of the love and support of my family. You can convey a message like Jerry did without embarrassing or hurting or absolutely. It's a shame, because when you then hear the judge say you were as defiant as a defendant as this court has ever seen, it was very clear to hear she was going to get the upper guideline sentence. And that's how I'm going to begin to wrap up this video before I head to Los Angeles for Game 1 against the Padres. I think 9 years is too long. I think it's too expensive. I think that we send too many people to prison in this country, but it's clear the judge was making an example out of her. He wanted to deter others and let them know what happens if you embarrass and violate this court. We are in favor of more prison reform. We are grateful to President Trump in late 2018 for signing the First Step Act. If he gets reelected, we expect there to be more prison reform. And if you're going through this really wretched system, we want you to understand that if more prison reform is going to come, the way that you're going to benefit from that reform is actually creating a new record of demonstrating through your own efforts and actions, whether you've gone to trial or not, why your life and your character is different than the government's version of events. My fear is, even with early release possibilities that exist for her, or reform within that system, or more reform federally, you're not going to benefit from it if you are using iPhones, if you're getting into trouble, if you're arguing with staff, if you are continuing to create problems. You're not going to benefit from reform that could bring you home more quickly. And if her goal is to somehow get home to her mother, if her goal is somehow to get back to the community as quickly as possible and benefit from programs that could get her home more quickly, it's going to require fundamentally different messaging. And that's the last piece of advice I'll offer her. I know she's not watching this video, but maybe someone who knows her is watching it and convey it to her. Miss Peters, while you're in prison, do not complain. Do not lament about the length of your sentence, because there are people in that prison who have not had opportunities that people like you and me had, and perhaps taken for granted. Find a way to use your skill set to teach, to mentor, to give back, to contribute, to find meaning in that. Because if you can do that, 9 years won't feel like 9 years, and you'll also benefit from some of those programs to get you home. But if you continue to play the victim or fall into this sort of memory distortion that everything you did was for the greater good and you're taking one for the team, I can assure you, every day is going to feel like an eternity. And you're going to make it harder on whom? Those that love and support you. 9 years, too long. She knew better, with better messaging, better mitigation, and post-offense conduct that didn't embarrass and violate court orders. She gets 3 years instead of 9. We can learn from the good and bad, learn from this bad case study, and take action. Thank you. Bye-bye.